Welcome back to Celebrating Senior Shutterbugs. In the last segment, David spoke to us about his first major step into the world of photography when he was hired by United Press International and covered the 1971 India-Pakistan War as one of his first assignments. In today's segment, we continue hearing about David's time at UPI and his experience in Vietnam. David, you were close to my age during the Vietnam War, so I wonder what it must have been like for you and your peers, and whether there was any uncertainty about the conflict. This is especially relevant to me and my peers, as we find ourselves facing similar uncertainty today. What was your state of mind like in Vietnam?
4 of my classmates were in the Army and were killed in Vietnam. And I didn't come from a very big high school class. Everybody knew everybody. These are kids I'd photographed playing baseball and all of that. And Vietnam was the biggest story of my generation. And as a news photographer, and I was committed to it at that point, this is the biggest story of my lifetime up to then. And I also felt a responsibility, kind of like as the class photographer for high school, like following through with these stories and going to this war that was killing people left and right, and to find out why that was happening and to show what was going on, which has always been the motivation for my career anyway. So I went to basic training, and then I was hired full time, which I mentioned. And then I got into the Oregon National Guard, which means you go to regular basic training. I mean, you're in the Army for 6 months, active duty. And I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And then I went to Fort Benjamin Harrison. So then when I came out, then you had to go to 1 weekend a month and a 2-week summer camp. And so the challenge I faced after that was going to Vietnam and still being in the Army Reserves at that point. And so I had a commanding general who arranged for me to get a leave of absence. So in other words, I got out of the Army to go to the war, which was not like a normal case. Or as the guy who made the final approval says, I don't think we'll be creating an ugly precedent here. Because everybody was going to the National Guard to get out of going to Vietnam, essentially. I mean, pure and simple. And I know I was one of them. It had nothing to do, obviously, with the fear of going to Vietnam. I just didn't want to go as a soldier. And so I was not a combat infantryman type. I actually was not an Army type, to be honest. But I never had a political dog in the hunt. That's why I wanted to see it for myself. I didn't have a pre-existing notion, mainly because I've been, at that point, been trained as a photographer, being objective, just the facts, all that. So anyway, I went over pretty well with open eyes and wanted to cover the war.
I think yours is one of the most interesting tales I've heard for how someone wound up in Vietnam, and certainly the first I've heard of someone getting out of the Army to go to war. Even though David wasn't there as a soldier, he was still present for some very intense combat. In our next segment, David talks about winning the Pulitzer by surprise, and how he found himself in the middle of a firefight the next day. In the segments that follow, David goes on, telling us about his time as the official White House photographer, what he's been up to today, and the advice he has for today's photographers. David's stories and photographs will all be available in his Rizzoli coffee table book, In the Room, which will be coming out this fall. We hope you will join us again, here at Celebrating Senior Shutterbugs.